Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Current members have the opportunity to lend support in many number of ways to new City Club members. We usually print the names of the mentors and the mentees in your program, but today one of our panelists and a former board member, Nikki Lynch, has brought her mentee with her to the program, and we would like to recognize him at this moment. He is Jim Postian. Jim is a financial consultant with Merrill Lynch and joined the club last month. Jim? Thank you. And thank you, Nikki, very much. The Board of Governors considered 3 resolutions referred from the membership as a result of last week's votes. The board voted unanimously to approve the board resolutions on ballot measures 2, 83, and 84. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from CH2M Hill, U.S. Bank, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car Foundation. Once again, we are very grateful for their ongoing support. Today we begin the first of a series of 5 debates as another part of our effort for election 2000. Today's debate is a single chair with Republican candidate for the 5th Congressional seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, Brian Boquist. The Democratic candidate, Darlene Hooley, was invited to participate but declined our invitation. So in view of expanding technologies and the internet, I guess you will be debating a virtual candidate. According to City Club policy, if a candidate is invited and declines the invitation, the other candidate has the right to a single appearance. I especially want to thank candidate Boquist and representatives of his campaign and guests. We encourage you to join and become part of this organization and others of the city. The debate will have several sections. First, Mr. Boquist will give a 5-minute opening statement. Following the opening statement, the candidate will respond to questions from our City Club panel, Nikki Lynch and Wayne Lay. Questions were submitted in advance in writing by members of the club. Following questions from the panel, there will be questions from City Club members in the audience. If you have a question for Mr. Boquist, please line up behind the microphones and please limit your question to 30 seconds. Mr. Boquist will have 1 minute to respond to each question. We will end the program with Mr. Boquist's 2-minute closing statement. And again, our timer for the day is Charlie Davis. This meeting is governed by the program format I've just described and by the rules of conduct which are displayed on all of your tables. No hissing, booing, clapping, name-calling will be allowed. Wait till next week. Please hold all your applause until the end of the program, and we will adjourn at 1:15. Brian Boquist is the Republican nominee for United States Representative from Oregon's 5th Congressional District. He handily beat his Republican challenger with a 66% of the vote in Oregon's first vote-by-mail primary last May. Mr. Boquist grew up on a dairy farm in Tillamook and now lives in Dallas, Oregon, with his wife Peggy and their 5 children. He is a graduate of Western Oregon State College and Oregon State University, where he earned an MS in Business Administration and Ethics. Mr. Boquist's company, International Charter Company of Oregon, has moved peacekeepers around the tropics, delivered emergency supplies and humanitarian aid to earthquake victims, and has responded rapidly to crisis situations on 6 continents. This afternoon, we look forward to hearing his rapid response comments about plans and priorities for Oregon's 5th Congressional District. Mr. Boquist.
I think you're already breaking the rules, aren't you, applauding here? And when you get questions, I notice we have for and against, so you'll give me an idea of where your questions come from if you line up behind the right microphone. I appreciate the opportunity to come here to the City Club. I appreciate the efforts they have put together to help educate and get the issues out to the members of the 5th Congressional Districts. And I also appreciate to say a thanks to my wife, who is behind the scenes taking care of these 5 children. And in fact, they have been out to 7 fairs across the 5th District. And there's even a Frog Days parade. And if you don't know, in the 5th Congressional District, the shortest parade is in Cloverdale. It's a half a block long. You circle twice. I want to talk briefly about my background, because I have a feeling that Nikki and Wayne will pretty well defang all of the issues as they come out. As Harriet said, I was born and raised on a dairy farm down in Tillamook, Oregon. That's the land of trees, cheese, and mud up to your knees if you're a dairy farmer. From there, after graduating from high school, I spent 4 years in the United States Army. I was enough of milking cows. I wasn't going to go back to Tillamook, and after 4 years in the Army, I thought Tillamook looked pretty good. I went back. I spent about a year in Tillamook working in the forestry sector before going to what was originally Oregon Normal School, which no one can tell us what normal is, and then became Oregon College of Education, and then Western Oregon State College, and now it's called WOW. And I wish them the best of luck in their next name change. I don't know where exactly we're going to go there. I was the student body president at Western Oregon State College. At the time, I graduated, was a speaker at the commencement ceremony. I then went on, worked a little in the private sector. I did some financial consulting for the Oregon State System of Higher Education and some liaison work with the Emergency Board and presentations of capital construction plans. I had an offer. I was going to go to law school. I was saved from that by the Dean of Administration at Western Oregon State College. He and the Vice Chancellor at the time for administration offered to assist me to go to Oregon State University and get a master's degree instead of becoming a lawyer. I'm not sure which would have been better, the law degree or the master's degree in either case. I did spend time at Oregon State University. You know, I am a quasi-beaver, if that's what you call it, and our campaign colors are orange. It has nothing to do with Oregon State University. I am surprised, though, that you can hardly get orange sweatshirts and T-shirts in this state, except in Corvallis. I think the Ducks have overcome the city of Portland. Green is easy to get. She did mention that I have spent about 24 years in the United States Army, United States Army Reserve, and the Army National Guard. I am presently an individual mobilee or individual ready reservist. I'm a Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel. That's an airborne school teacher. Forget about the John Wayne movies and forget about the press. I mean, what they do is go teach foreign nations various courses. I've spent about the last 20 years in the private sector, primarily in the farming, forestry, and the aviation leasing sector. Our business operates on 5 continents, as I mentioned. We've done a lot of work in the Congress, both on the Senate side, on the House side, on humanitarian issues, and trying to stem the flow of illicit diamonds that are frankly destroying, you know, at least one continent. For those who have followed the whole saga that's been in the Oregonian and the Statesman about Sierra Leone, we've been deeply involved in there, working bipartisan with Democrats and Republicans on that particular issue. And we've been at that about 5 years. You have to stay in there and you have to stay engaged to make any ground. And it is like politics and business. There are 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. With that, I want to talk briefly about 4 topics and go on to questions. Education, Social Security, health care, and taxes. If you did a poll, which we haven't, we're using other people's data, those are the main issues that are out in the 5th Congressional District. People are concerned about local control. People are concerned about accountability in education. People are concerned about the future. How do you pay for colleges, educational savings accounts, and those are all valid concerns. And then tied into education, what most people don't know is some of the environmental laws. We were beat up recently on an issue. If you're not familiar, that half of the federal timber sales, between 25% and half of the federal timber revenue, went originally to local roads and to to local schools. I commend my opponent, as with the rest of the Congress, that we have done at least a one-year stopgap to try and return funding to those counties to help in local roads. But in fact, we haven't solved the problem. We still have, environmental laws that are constraining electricity and other areas. Social Security is a topic that everybody is familiar with. I mean, it must be preserved, and we must have individual retirement options that give us a long-range fix on Social Security. Patient's bill of rate and health care is a big issue, but more importantly is fair care, and that's the ability for everyone to be insured, and regardless of their income, and how best to approach that. And then the last is taxes. I mean, the whole issue of tax overhaul, tax reform, the marriage penalty tax, the estate tax, which my opponent here recently in the last year has come on board with that, and I commend her for that. Unfortunately, we have not got it past the existing president at this time in any form whatsoever. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to questions. I know the parliamentarians' fingers are getting itchy there, and the timekeeper is going to float up there, and so I will take questions from the panel.
I now turn the program over to Nikki and Wayne, and the first question will come from Nikki Lynch.
You say in your issue statement that you are firmly behind states' rights. Does that mean you will oppose federal legislation that would take away Oregon's right to die law?
I haven't read in depth. I know that, I don't know that, I will not commit one way or the other. I think the state definitely has the right to pass whatever it wants to. I know Ron Wyden has been working on a compromise to that upholds the intent. I happen to have had both parents die of cancer, and they died with dignity, without assisted suicide. And unfortunately, I have been in nations across the world that have this, and it's gotten a bit out of control. Generally, I'm opposed to suicide, so that's an issue that I'm going to have to overcome when I get there.
Mr. Boquist, you mentioned that education is one of the issues in your district. More specifically, what do you think the federal government's role should be in funding public schools?
This is an interesting question because most people don't know. We talk about the Department of Education. The Republicans in the 96 and 98 election made a lot of talk about it. The reality is this: there are 760 federal programs, 39 agencies spending between $68 and $140 billion on education already. 35 cents on the dollar is spent on bureaucracy. The role of the federal government, since they already have our money, is just to return the money back to the parents, the teachers, and the local administrators in exchange for an agreement of accountability. And that means cutting the red tape off, letting the state legislature and the local school boards work with this. But the first thing you've got to do is you've got to merge those federal programs, get some accountability at the federal level, cut the 30% bureaucracy out of it so that there's 5% at the federal level, and then return the funds back here to the state.
What is your view of the current state of military readiness and personnel morale, and what would you do about this in Congress?
It's deplorable. The problem we face now is we've been overcommitted across the globe while taking cuts. However, I will tell you, I might agree with the George Bush, some of George Bush's proposals, and I might agree with some of William Jefferson Clinton's recent proposals in fixing the individual pay discrepancies for those that are on food stamps and addressing some of those issues. But generally, we're spending about the right money on defense. What most people don't know is when we had about 12 million men under arms in World War II, we had less generals and less leadership. What needs to happen in the military is a massive reform at the top, a massive remissioning based on what the mission and the national security threat is, and then turn around and determine how do you fund that. I personally believe the funding will be about the same, if not less. Right now, what we're doing with national defense is, here's your $300 million pie, how do you want to spend it? And that's no way to run a nation.
This is a question about at-risk kids. You've talked about helping children in developing countries, which is very laudable. Many children in this country are being born into unstable homes, which limits their prospects for the future. There is considerable evidence that suggests early intervention from birth to age 3 with at-risk kids can be very beneficial. How do you think the federal government should be involved in early assistance for at-risk kids?
Again, we're really back at a funding issue. The federal government has a series of programs that have somewhat succeeded and somewhat failed. The interesting thing is those programs that, that the administration lauds and we all look at, for example, in your head, some of your Head Start programs, it's always local communities that made them work. And what we need to do is we need to focus the resources where the outcome is the best. And to turn around in Washington, D.C. and say that Washington, D.C. has the answer other than returning our money back to our state and our local officials, all one has to do is walk through Washington, D.C. at midnight on any given night of the week, and you can figure out very quickly that Congress, who's responsible for one major federal program in Washington, D.C., has failed at that. So, my approach is to identify those areas and bring it back. But then again, cut this, 30 cents on the dollar we're spending on this bureaucracy. We need to cut it and get it back to the local communities. And early intervention, responsible early intervention, is one way to do that.
Agriculture is very important in the 5th Congressional District. What are 2 critical issues facing the district's agricultural industry, and how will you address these issues in Congress?
Environment and taxes. If you saw the report yesterday, 38% decrease in income. I think Tillamook County has lost about 25% of their farms in 3 years. We have farms, just so you did mention, the 2 largest, if you don't know, the 2 largest agriculture producing states in Oregon are in fact Marion and Clackamas County. The first thing is the environmental issues. We need community impact statements that balance environmental law. And that's really, everybody blames the judges and everybody blames environmentalists. The Congress passed bad laws to start with. They were so broad and they weren't well defined. And now that they can't bridge or build a bridge across the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., all congressmen are suddenly interested in fixing Western, Oregon's problems. In the same token, in the tax side, is that we're taxing these farmers to death, and of course their income and their revenue is down right now. And taxation is one of those issues that really permeates all families. And just to follow up, so farming does fall in the same area as small business, and that's 96% of the 5th Congressional District. We don't have any big companies like we have here in Portland.
Relationship building is the cornerstone of politics. Could you give some examples of ways you've worked to collaborate in a bipartisan manner or with diverse groups of people?
Well, I'm ahead of you. In the introduction, I talked about working with Tony Hall, who is probably the most liberal Democratic congressman and strongest supporter of Bill Clinton. And what we found is common ground on issues. And that goes across with working with Joe Biden's office in the Congress already in trying to push legislation and humanitarian assistance through, reform the United Nations peacekeeping operations, their humanitarian programs. And in addition to that, obviously I've served in 34 countries as a foreign officer, and I'm still standing here. And contrary to popular belief, when you go out as special forces, you go out with 12 people. So you're outmanned, outgunned, and the only thing you're not is out-talked. So you've got to build coalition quick, or you will not survive.
Oregon relies heavily on federal funding for many public health activities such as Women, Infant, and Children's Program, immunizations, and communicable disease support. How do these issues fit into your priority list, and what will you do about them in Congress?
As I mentioned, really the number 3 priority, if you're making a list, is in fact health care. Again, we're back at where you have local community health centers that are doing the work. But if you go ask a community health nurse when they try to get a federal grant, they got to have a grant writer. Now, the cost of the grant writer will basically immunize a whole host of other people. What we need to be doing is focusing again on the programs that work, streamlining the grant program, because that's what we're talking about, and bringing it back in that particular area. Another option is fair care, and I'm a big fan of fair care, and that is the ability to give tax credits or direct subsidies for choices in private health care for low-income families. That is statistically proven to be much less expensive than the government doing the program. And we're in a nation where, we have plenty of money. The question is, how do we spend it and where do we spend it that makes the most sense? And that's locally, that's with families. The problem you have with that goes back to what we talked earlier. Intervention is there is a statistical number of the community that we have out there, even if we provide them a tax credit, not a deduction, that's a credit, or even if we give them direct money and say you just have to pay a $10 a month co-share, they don't do it. For whatever reason, they don't want help, and unfortunately, we have to help them in the end because when something happens, they come to us to seek help.
This question is actually in 3 parts.
Did I make 3 minutes?
What do you consider to be the accomplishments of Darlene Hooley while she has represented the 5th District in Congress? What are some of her weaknesses, and what would you do differently?
I'll get you to repeat them. First one is, what are her accomplishments? She has been a noble crusader on the issue of senior care. There is no two ways about that. And she has pushed that issue hard. I would disagree with her, as would some members of the AARP when it came to items like prescription care, we'll say. The Congress tried to set aside $40 billion for prescription care, and the Republicans passed a plan. Everybody wanted to argue about it. Well, this isn't the perfect plan. You need to start someplace. There was an offer to start. She got up and walked out of the Congress. And she's still out crusading right now on that particular issue. And luckily, Ron Wyden, a Democrat, is, of course, picked up that cause and moved forward. In the area, the second area that she's done is some of the, the identity theft and some of the working with the IRS. She was involved diligently in the initial stages of reforming the IRS. The unfortunate is most people who are professionals here know that the reform started at level 3, and that's in the tax court area, and it didn't answer the problem of what are we going to do about 102,000 pages of tax code and tax law. What we need to do is simplify it. Now, the unfortunate thing in Congress that deals with this issue, when you say, what do you do and how do you get it done? That is, we saw how we got a balanced budget in the Congress in the United States. We went around and we talked to everybody in the room in the Congress and said, you agree we need a balanced budget? And everybody said yes publicly. So then they passed a law that said we all publicly agree that we're going to balance the budget in 2 years, but we don't know how to do it, and we're not going to agree how to do it for 2 years. And then we basically put everybody's feet to the fire 2 years later, and we balanced the budget. That's a terrible way to do business. And the IRS code is exactly the same way, where they have tried to pass and say we're going to abolish IRS code within the next 2 years. It's a sad state of affairs in Congress where that's how you do legislation. What really needs to be worked out is bipartisanness up front. And I'm not talking where she moves over 13% of the time and votes with the Republicans on a few tax issues. What I'm talking about is true bipartisanship and sitting down. The system's broke. Now, if the economy goes downhill, gas prices continue to rise, and we have an energy shortage with the Northwest Power Planning Council says we're going to have, everybody's going to be talking about bipartisan, and compromises.
In the 2 decades since Oregon's 5th Congressional District was established, it has been represented by Denny Smith, Mike Kopetsky, Jim Bunn, and Darlene Hooley. In what ways would your own tenure build on and or distinguish itself from this diverse representation?
Well, first thing, let me talk about the Secretary of State's race, because who knows what the 5th Congressional District is going to look like in 2 years from now. And I'll tell you, fact of life, you all are very experienced in politics. You have politicians here. I live on one edge. I live out on the other side of Dallas on one edge of the district. And Darlene lives on the other edge. And, the legislature and the governor are not going to agree. If it's a Republican legislator or even a split. So the Secretary of State's going to decide where the lines fall. Now, I have what I call in the 5th District lollipop land. Now, that's Corvallis because that's basically a war between the states, civil war or war of northern aggression or whatever you term in your history class, the Civil War. When they went down in gerrymandering, the 5th District was a great example for, for 100 years later. We have a district that runs up a road, circles around a city and comes down, and it's scattered across, both sides. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future of the district. I think the critical importance for everybody across the board, whether I'm elected, whether Darlene's back in there, what we have right now is a district that's driven by small businesses that are hurting terribly. And when they start collapsing at a faster rate, we had 8 major agricultural processing plants file bankruptcy in the last 6 to 8 weeks. We have over 2,000 jobs laid off from high energy prices because the surplus power is gone. Everybody that goes to the gas pump realizes the gas prices are higher, and that's a reflection of foreign policy. I hate to disagree with Republicans. It has a lot to do with energy policy, but it really has to do with the total failure of foreign policy and defense structure policy. And so what we need to do is focus on helping those individuals, because those businesses that employ 5 or 6 people are the ones that pay the taxes, that pay the federal government to bring money here. They're the ones that pay for the school. And we got communities in the 5th District that have not been helped up. You go down to South Lincoln County down there, and it's a depression. We're not in a recession. We're in a depression. And we need to stop talking about how to fix it and do something to fix it.
In your literature, you cite your membership on the Western Oregon State College Budget Committee and 17 years as a congressional activist. Could you please describe these activities and your primary areas of focus?
Actually, I served on 3 budget committees. Western Oregon State College, I was the chairman of what the Oregonian, I'm not going to beat up the reporter that's here because he didn't write it, said was a very small school district, which is Perrydale. I serve in that. I also was the chairman, as I mentioned, of Central School District, which is not a small school district. And hold on to your shorts here, because these Republicans who took over and were beat up actually increased taxes at that time in those districts because there were legitimate needs. And so what we did in the budget areas, we went and identified in each of the sectors of those schools, what were the real problems. Get beyond the rhetoric and teachers arguing about administrators, and where's the leaky roof? Why don't we have enough teachers in the classroom? And then come up and say, all right, we know the pie is only so large, how are we going to split it? And if we can only get even, in those days you could get 5% more. We're going to only get 5% more, and how do we address these problems, and how do we go forward with that? You ask on the activist side, and as I touched base with here, I have gone back, and I can tell you right now it's easier to work in Congress than it is in the Oregon State Legislature. And Darlene knows that, and I think that, Ron Wyden knows that well, and so does Earl Blumenauer here in your guys' district. And that is that things are done on committees. And so you have less people to actually influence to get positive outcomes. And when you come back here and start talking about 4D rules and point source water issues and things like that are critical in our district, what you have to do is educate people. And unfortunately what we have is if those of you have been back there, is we have young, energetic, hard-charging staffers that have no clue what a 4D rule is. They haven't been out here to the 5th Congressional District. And so it's up to the member, not his staff, the member to go out and identify to the other members of the Congress what the problems are. I mean, I sat down with 3 members on the Resource Committee and talked 4D rule, point source water, and non-point source water issues, which are huge environmental issues in the 5th Congressional District, and I got the deer in the headlight look. They had no clue what I was talking about, and they're on the committee.
City Club members may now ask questions of our candidate. I will alternate questions that have been submitted to me in writing. I'll start off with one that has been submitted to me in writing. Do you support a constitutional amendment to ban abortion?
I didn't get to see which mic it came from here. No, I do not. There's been a lot of discussion about constitutional amendments. I'm pro-life. I make no bones about that. And let me tell you, I mean, the federal government isn't going to legislate morality. To try and tamper with the Constitution to do so is a bad idea. And frankly, as a constitutional Republican, trying to, as many people have suggested, well, let's have a constitutional convention, I have no clue what would come out the other end of it, but I don't think I'd be very happy with it. The federal role in abortion, because that's really what this question is asking, is, to me, needs to be very limited. And it's a funding issue, and we've been beat up on this. Partial birth abortion, worldwide funding of abortions, everything else like that. If it's an individual choice, then it's an individual choice. But let's not be funding it with everybody's money, especially in the areas of partial birth abortion and some of the areas like that. But it's not something that that the Congress ought to be tampering with in that particular area of a constitutional menu. And frankly, I'm not going to be in the Senate, so I'm not going to be appointing or confirming Supreme Court justices. And even if they were 3 die on the first day and George Bush is in office and they appoint them, it will be years before anything is ever discussed about Roe versus Wade. Well, I'm comfortable. He's going to the fore, Mike.
Andrew Kaiser, City Club member. There's been recent press accounts about INS activity in Portland, an overzealous approach to screening arrivals from Japan and Korea, plus a recent press story about INS's decision to take about face on a Guatemalan here in the Portland area. Do you believe the INS is an agency that needs reform, and why?
Well, if it was off the record, I'd say sacking might be a better term. This INS issue is unbelievable. This has been going on. We talked about this out at the Port of Portland in June. the behavior of this organization, is not only indespicable to start with, and especially when we know that there's hardworking, good agents out there. The problem that you face here is I don't think they understand the impact. As soon as the Oregonian reports it, the AP picks it up, and it's across the entire wire, and it hurts the economy of this state, which is seriously dependent on foreign trade. I don't know all the details of the particular two cases you're talking about, but I did have several cases explained in detail to me at the Port of Portland, and I would agree wholeheartedly with them that it needs some reform and some adult supervision out there.
Would you support continued U.S. engagement in the Balkans, especially Bosnia and Kosovo, where we already have a sizable military presence?
No. I'm a military officer. I've been down this road before. I'll tell you right now, what we need to do is we need to find a way to get out respectfully, and we need to find a way to get out that will leave, hopefully, a lasting peace. The notion of standing between two wires for the next 30 years isn't going to work. It'll go until we collapse. And I will bring to your case, most of you don't know, is this is the issue in Cyprus. The United Nations went into Cyprus years and years and years ago, 30-some years ago, somebody might know more than I, 35 years ago, and in a nutshell, they've been standing on a wire on both sides. And when they pull out, they're going to go back to fighting because this is a 2,000-year-old war. We face the same thing, as you all well know and saw in Israel when the United Nations pulled out and went the other way. I also remind you, we're going to be there 1 year. And we're now here 5 years later. We're not any better off than we were. The Kosovo Liberation Army was listed by Interpol. This is the group we went in and supported as, the largest heroin smugglers in Europe. So, these engagements need to come to an end, and we need to have clear understandings going in, clear mechanisms for getting out, and we need to stop destroying the military while we're doing it without having these things. I guess you're up. And I'm ready. I got my vest on.
I'm at the against microphone only because it was vacant, and I am a Democrat, but that's...
I won't hold that against you, and I still want
so.
your vote. So.
I'm not in your district. So anyway, my question is, do you support, or do you believe this country is well served by the police state model of the war on drugs, which we are now engaged in? If so, why do you think it's a good policy? And if not, how would you change it?
Well, I don't want you to pass out when I say this, but the war on drugs is an absolute sham. I mean, it's nonsense. First thing is we need to go back and we need to look. There are 52,000 drug-related deaths per year. That means it's a serious problem. In fact, there are more drug-related deaths per year than there are, in fact, automobile accidents. Now, the problem comes out here is that we're talking about a war on drugs. I've been to Colombia, been down there 3 years. I mean, it's no war on drugs. We're doing a lot of talking out of both sides of our mouth. So the first problem, though, is and this was told to me by the brigade commander of Colombian Aviation down there long before these helicopters came up into the news, and that is it does not matter what we do in our country, because this organization is driven down here, the FARC, by drug money. We can capture entire sections of the country, and they're going to move and produce somewhere else, or we could kill every man, woman, and child in this country, and they're going to move over to Peru and produce it. The problem is domestic use right here, and that means that we got to get people off of drugs in this country, and we need to do it. The only place we can do it right now that we're not doing it, that we have access, is in our prison systems, and that is we need to, people are rotating in. Meth, I just listened to a speech yesterday. We have got to get some serious drug treatment programs, and frankly, the Republicans got to look at this and look at the cost-benefit analysis like they always want to analyze it, and let's fix this problem and stop talking about it. We want to talk about gun control and everything else, but we don't want to fix real problems that we have here in this country. Go ahead, sir.
I think the next alternative would be a written question if there's one pending.
No, I was exercising my prerogative as presiding officer and letting you ask the question.
Well, thank you. My name is Monroe Sweetland. I'm a member of the club. We've known your opponent a long time in Oregon politics. She, in the state legislature, everything, as a teacher, and everything she's ever done, she's been motivated in the minds of all or most of us by the best of motives. In your recent newspaper advertising, it seemed to me you were taking advantage of her absence. She's in Washington doing our business as she's supposed to be doing, and is, as we talk, as I understand it, probably on her way back home for this weekend to try to get in some more time in the district. But you, in your printed matter, have attacked her motives as being to increase her chance of a more adequate pension when she retires from Congress. This is scurrilous, it's unfair, and she isn't here to defend herself. I'd be interested in what answer you have to your taking advantage of our club's rules, which were designed to prevent people absenting themselves for no reason at all, or for fear of the conflict, and tell us how you really feel, and are you willing to repudiate your statements about her motives in being a candidate for re-election?
No, I'm not going to apologize for anything. Let me make this clear, and I think this club can substantiate this. She had the option of 3 dates to come here, and she chose because it wasn't in the district. Now, we have offered 3 times, and she has offered to us to do debates, and we've asked the League of Women Voters to do that, and she hasn't. As to the issue you bring up, our issue that is printed, to those of you who haven't seen it, we will be happy to get you, that the gentleman brought up, is a very simple thing, and that is the congressional retirement is after 5 years you get $1,200 in retirement. If you work for 46 years and put into Social Security, you get $850 in retirement, and you ask why Congress is not fixing Social Security. And more to your question, let me ask this, is education fixed? My opponent, of course, was in the legislature. Legislature passed education in 21st District. What we need is new ideas, and frankly, I can tell you we need to eliminate congressional retirement completely. I'm not particularly an advocate of term limits, but when you spend 5 years and you get a $1,200 a month retirement, and we got hardworking families going down the tube out here, I don't take that very kindly.
Please elaborate on your position regarding background checks at gun shows.
This is another interesting one that I wish the federal government would enforce the laws that it is already pushing right now. Unfortunately, what we have in the state of Oregon, and a circuit court judge in Linn Benton County just talked about this yesterday, is that we have hardworking police officers, and we got $100,000 more out of federal money, but all we're doing is rotating around. They're rearresting the same people. Now, when it comes to gun shows and background checks, the federal firearms licensees are supposed to be checked now. I think we've prosecuted something in the neighborhood of 25 or 30 across the United States. Federal prosecutions are down 49%. What we need to start doing is before we pass a bunch of more new laws, is we need to start enforcing the ones we have. And this goes back to, I don't know if there's a correlation between the war on drugs where you're saying, well, we're not prosecuting because we don't have any jail space, or what exactly the deal is, but let's not be passing laws, whether they're gun laws or whether they're national marine fisheries laws, that says, well, we're going to pass this law but not enforce it. What kind of a law is that, and what kind of a representative does that?
Dan Goldie, City Club member, and don't misinterpret this. You talked briefly in your opening remarks about Social Security, but you didn't explain or stay where you were on the issues which are being debated in the national campaign. My question is this: do you support Governor Bush's proposal for partial privatization, which most economists believe would blow, because of the diversion of funds, the tax monies, $1 trillion hole in the revenue stream to support Social Security as we have it today? And if you do, how would you make up for that $1 trillion? Would you cut benefits, increase taxes, increase age? What would you do to make up that $1 trillion?
First thing, let's talk about Social Security overall to answer your first question. What we need to do, and how they talk about saving Social Security, is balancing the budget. And then we got this big surplus, and as all as you know, that surplus is a forecast, and it only exists if the economy is, great and everything's good. What happened to save Social Security was a Balanced Budget Act. And the intent of that act was to make sure that we didn't spend excess money elsewhere and make this program, insolvent any sooner than what it's supposed to be. And it really starts getting insolvency about 2014, and then it's totally insolvent about 2035 if you start looking at it. So the first thing you have to do is you have to put money back into trust. And people say, well, we can't save money because it's against the law. Well, it takes 51% of the votes, and it's a new law, and you save the money. That's the first issue. The second thing is, I haven't read in depth George Bush's study. However, I haven't seen any economic reports as you're talking about. George Bush isn't out here helping me campaigning, and I have my own campaign to run. So what I will tell you is that I do know that George Bush, for a better word, he didn't plagiarize it, but he borrowed that plan from the Democrats. It is 2 Democratic congressmen that proposed that plan originally. Patrick Moynihan was one of them. And what it does is it phases in a 2% in exchange for a reduction in benefits farther in the future. I would be most interested to see the economic numbers you're talking about, because I've not seen those. And there's a bipartisan group beating out there. Now, you got to remember, Al Gore proposed that we take 2% of it out and the government invest it. And I'm totally opposed to the government investing it. They haven't done very good with Social Security at all at this point, which has a 1.7 rate of return. And then the other thing that he proposed that you may not know is he proposed to take 2% off the business side of that going in there and make an environmental tax out of it. So, we have, one president saying 2%, 1% saying 4%. And until you really have a surplus and a plan, it doesn't do any good to talk about it.
We began this afternoon's program with a City Club vote on ballot measure number 9. What is your position on ballot measure 9?
Well, it's one of the 28 I have not read. And I guess the Secretary of State says there's 350 arguments or 350 pages. What does alarm me, and I also point out, the Supreme Court has said that homosexuality is a behavior and not a right. They just did that, which causes a big hoopla, and the Boy Scouts got beat up for it. I am alarmed immediately by the 2 pieces of documents I have seen. One's a Portland State University flyer, which is publicly paid for, it looks like, and I've asked to have somebody clarify that. And I've seen one from the Portland School District on the same thing. I don't support special rights for anybody. It needs to be equal rights across the board. I put it out right here. Going back and having affirmative action and established quotas is a bad idea too. That's 9 is one we will look at as we get farther along with the other 28. If somebody proves that in fact it's happening and there needs to be a balance, then I'd probably vote in favor of it. If somebody proves that otherwise, then I won't. Same thing goes with trapping moles and the rest of it. I do support the kicker, though, and in fact, we're in the ballot supporting the kicker because I want my money back. Yes, ma'am.
Corleen Kraft, club member. I didn't understand that answer.
I haven't read it.
But you know what the
No.
context is, don't you?
Let me tell you how this works at the state.
Oh, okay.
What happens at the state is you continue, as Bill Sizemore did, and everybody else, you continue to file and file and file until you get a ballot measure title that you want. And that ballot measure title may or may not have anything to do with what is being proposed on the ballot. Now, if they're proposing on the ballot that we should not support, homosexuality in schools as a teaching point, then I would agree with that. If they're going to constrain somebody's rights, then I would disagree with that. But I did point out I've seen 2 public school documents, which I've asked both, to verify they are Portland State University and public school documents, that would be censored in any newspaper as pornography, and it's being distributed and taught in the school.
Well, I guess I will ask a question about that instead of the question I was prepared to ask. You said that it would depend upon what proof was provided so that you could decide how you would vote on that. What kind of proof and when could someone provide it to you prior to the election?
We've actually called the OCA and said, well, what do you have that shows the public's teaching this? Okay? And the exact opposite side, which you're going to see all over cable and media here, is that, well, it's not happening, it's not being taught in the schools. Well, if one side says they have proof it is and the other side says it's not, then let's see what somebody has to say one way or the other. I'm opposed, frankly, to most sex education in the school. Most sex education in the school has resulted in higher teen pregnancies, which is exactly what it was supposed to prevent. We have schools at the same time that are turning around and putting, condoms in the hands of everybody. Yet that's not exactly a smart idea either. It's a very debatable topic, and I'm not sure it ought to be in the school at all, either side.
Well, then I think I'll just ask the tail end of one of the questions Wayne asked, and that is, what would you do differently than Darlene is doing it now?
I think the first thing is that we need to go in differently, you say. We need to press forward. Now, I would ask you, Darlene has come around to the business way of thinking on estate tax and marriage penalty. In the first couple of years, she did not. She voted against them. That's a matter of congressional record. The president vetoed them. Being in Congress is also picking up the phone and calling those people in the White House and saying, this is really hurting our district out here. You know, why are you vetoing it? And, you know, will you reconsider? That's the sort of thing that congressmen have to do. Now, whether if I were elected and it was Al Gore or whether it was George Bush, I'd do the same thing. Gas taxes we have out here, everybody jumped on the gas tax issue, or not the gas tax issue, the high gas rates, and said, well, we're going to pass a law on both sides and send it to the president saying, you need to see if OPEC is price fixing. Now, everybody in this room watches the news and knows full well that they have a meeting and they price fix. The issue of high gas prices is, again, one of leadership. I mean, if you're a congressman, you should be calling up the president and say, you need to get on the phone. We're defending Saudi Arabia and we're defending Kuwait with men and women from the 5th Congressional District, citizen soldiers, yet they're charging us $32 a barrel. And it's not Chevron making that money, though they're making more money. It's those countries making it. And what you have to do and do differently is be proactive and not reactive. The last thing is I'm totally opposed to her position on the environmental side. I mean, we need to get community impact statements here that validate. We're not going to get rid of environmental impact statements, and they serve a very useful purpose. But what we need to do is get more balance.
I'm going to bundle two questions from the floor. The first is, what are your thoughts about restoring our native salmon runs? And the second question is, what question would you ask of Darlene Hooley?
I think I'll refer back to that. I think the first thing I would ask Darlene is has she got on the phone with the president about the gas issue? And has she got on the phone with the president about estate tax and marriage penalty tax? Those are two big issues hitting us here in the district. The salmon issue is one of those where, again, there are 2 or 3 sets of rules. We have Atlantic salmon, which the court has determined is all the salmon on the East Coast. Yet on the West Coast over here, we have at least 12 runs that we're talking about that are endangered here in Oregon. Well, what's different between Pacific salmon and Atlantic salmon? The difference is that we're talking about runs that go up a river. Scientific evidence is mixed as far as that goes of whether they go up Fall Creek or whether they go up the Nestucca River. You know, when we were kids and went to school, they said it goes up the same river, and now that's been proven to be a little bit different. The breaching of 4 dams on the Columbia River, I'm absolutely opposed to. The statistics and the science behind it is absent. And in fact, when you do go to breach those, you're going to create silt beds, which will ruin more fish habitat to start with. And it also doesn't address the issue, everybody says they're small dams, but right now we're out of electricity. Northwest Power Planning Council doesn't even know if we'll have enough electricity for growth in the next year.
Charlie Davis, member. Since I've done such a superb job of keeping the time moving, we're ahead of time for a little bit. I have a question about your career in special services. I apologize, the only career I know about in special services was a guy by the name of Wes Cooley. And I have no notion of painting you with that brush.
I can appreciate that, though.
Could you tell us exactly what you were doing in these 40 countries you went to, and whether special services was part of the CIA or the local establishment, and what you were seeking to accomplish?
Well, I always get asked when you're in the aviation business, they say, you're like Evergreen. So do you work for the CIA? No, but they publicly bid their contracts, and if they want to give us one, we'll take one, because they employ people here in Oregon. Special forces, and this is the news media does this great. One of these days, we're going to get Dave Hogan over here in the Oregonian educated on this, because everybody says special forces, special this, so on and so forth. The SEALs are the Navy version of special operations people. I was in Army Special Forces, United States Army Reserve, and Army National Guard. What Special Forces do is they are the Green Berets that John F. Kennedy, the Democrat, gave the Green Berets to, and there's a little bit of truth, but there's more hype to the John Wayne movie about the Green Berets than anything else. What generally Special Forces do is their primary mission is unconventional warfare and foreign internal defense. and you go to foreign nations and you help teach their military or their civilian police, supposedly, and I say supposedly because I'm going to give you a bad example here in a minute, they supposedly teach them to military tactics and then how to respect democracy and be a military and a civilian government. However, I will tell you, because I've got 20-some years in Africa experience, both in special forces and the private sector, is we got a dismal track record on that. I think, virtually every country that's been overthrown's military, including Sierra Leone, was betrayed by the Americans. And there are those of us that have told them for 30 years nearly, somebody, in fact, a major general above me, and I have said, you're doing this wrong. This is not the way to go about doing it. So I'm not the career, shine your boots, go solve the military problems that way. I mean, we've done some good things and we've done some bad things. And no, I don't know Wes Cooley, and I didn't do any secret operations in Korea. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sharon Joy, City Club member. Big issue for me, of course, is the right to die. For me, I feel that quality of life is the primary goal of government and of death, both sides, and that everyone born will die, which shows us that God considers both of them equal in importance in their time. What I'm saying is, what about the quality of death, and how do you feel?
Like I said, I lost both parents to cancer. And then my wife lost, and we lost two of them very recently, and they were deaths that were long and were lingering, and they were in hospice. What's that?
But there are much worse and much longer ones.
Yes, that's true. Quality of life is how we describe our American medical system and our entire philosophy. Is quality of life. If you went to Canada, or you went to Amsterdam, or you went to Sweden, and two of those three have versions of assisted suicide, quality of life has left their medical system. It's all process in and process out, and the elective surgeries are gone. My concern, with when you say assisted suicide, quality of life, is are we addressing the individual's right to die? Or are we are we starting down the road that these other countries got to where pretty soon they decide that we're not going to attach a finger back or we're not going to do something. It's now all about life, whether you live or whether you die, and there's no quality afterward. And the Europeans in some places have got some dismal systems. And that's one that I morally have a problem with. I'll tell you right up front, and I'd be more than happy to talk at length with you about it.
Question for the parliamentarian. Do we have time for one more question, or is this now closing argument? I mean, we'll now have a closing statement.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come here. I would encourage you all that if you're in the 5th District, I don't think you are, but to talk to the people that are in the 5th District and tell them, to get educated and informed. This is about issues. It's not about what we've done for 35 years, because if everything was perfect for 35 years, we wouldn't need re-elections and other candidates wouldn't run, and education wouldn't theoretically be broken, and we wouldn't have a false war on drugs. I mean, things aren't perfect and they need improved, and we need some new ideas out there. There's lots of places out there to get information. We have a website. The League of Women Voters has the Democracy Net, which I think is d.org, I believe. Project Vote Smart is vote-smart-org. In addition to that, our campaign has given 15 pages of issue statements to all of the media that's out there. We're more than happy to provide it to anybody else. And all of our issue statements are up on our web pages that talks about what we're about and what we're talking about and where we're going. The problem a challenger has is that he has to point out the opponent's voting record and how they voted. And a lot of people look at that as negative. You're not going to see any personal attacks from us. I don't agree with somebody's interpretation that they are. You also need to have a little humor and keep a straight face at times so that, when you do proceed, that you can work bipartisan together. Darlene made a good comment at the editorial board that she and I attended recently, and that is even though there were some very heated times in several of her campaigns, she's still on speaking speaking terms and still works with some of the people that have challenged her and works against her. I would close, and many of you, not in this district, but have seen, we were running 600 commercials out there. They're just finishing up, I think. And I would tell you there is a clear choice. I mean, I'm a constitutional Republican. What I believe is in better education, local control, local government, and everybody's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'd be more than happy afterwards to entertain questions, even respectfully disagree with the gentleman here, and talk with the lady in the wheelchair. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Brian Boquist for being with us today, and thank all of you in the audience for participating in this conversation. We are adjourned.